Summer, 1891. The scene, Principality of Monaco, the Monte Carlo Casino. A luxurious resort opened just 30 years earlier and bankrolled by the prince himself. Once a forgotten backwater, the city-state has blossomed into a destination. Thanks in large part to the newly constructed French national rail system, tourists flock from far and wide to experience this treasure trove on the Mediterranean coast. And to see this, its shiniest gem, the Monte Carlo, with its wide, cream-colored verandas and crowning green dome. Guests, upon stepping inside, find themselves politely ushered to a magnificent central gaming room. High ceilings, ornate glass chandeliers, intricate candelabras, golden light, sculptures of cherubs and angels, colorful hand-painted frescoes. It all appears like some sort of Renaissance basilica. But, lest you should be fooled, this is no holy place. Rather, parishioners are wealthy degenerates looking to booze and gamble. And that's no altar, but instead a fully stocked bar, replete with a pyramid of oddly shaped glass bottles, fine wine and spirits shipped in with utmost care from every corner of the globe. To this, a church of sin. Impeccably dressed waitstaff flutter to and fro, serving drinks and catering to every whim of the esteemed customers. There are tables of all sorts: poker, blackjack, baccarat. But on this very night, the focal point is the roulette wheel. One singular figure sits alone in a tall wooden chair amid a babble of quiet whispers. He has drawn the attention of this who's who of celebrities and financiers. You might expect the man is some real-life version of Ian Fleming's James Bond. They do have one thing in common. They are both Englishmen. But this individual is short and bald, a middle-aged man dressed in a fine suit, but by no means the finest. He is inconspicuous, or otherwise would be, if not for the Herculean feat which he finds himself in the midst of. The last 30 spins of the wheel, he has won 23 of them. Even Lady Luck herself sits on the edge of her seat. She, and everyone in the room, wishes nothing more than to suspend their disbelief for just a moment longer. But before the mysterious stranger can cue up his bets for another round, casino staff rush the table carrying a black cloth. A mustached young waiter unceremoniously drapes it over the table. Play is suspended. To bring the lucky patron his winnings from the establishment's vault, they explain, and to replenish the table's reserves for future rounds. The perceptive see this ruse for what it is: a last-ditch effort to snuff out a shooting star before it burns too brightly and the whole place comes crumbling down. It's a ceremony known well to those who have frequented the premises long enough. A grand finale. A definite, if disappointing, anticlimax that somehow only serves to draw even more attention. But by then it hardly matters. The mysterious gambler has had his fill. He takes one last sip from his drink, gets up from the table, winnings in hand, and walks out into the warm Monaco night. Sugar, a potent addictive substance. Some even might say a psychoactive chemical. The closest thing to pure bliss known by the human tongue. The irony? Making it is an extremely laborious process. Throughout history, most sugar came from sugarcane, which grew in fields. Only recently had some inventive, or perhaps disturbingly curious soul, figured out you could get the same stuff out of a sugar beet. This sort of ugly, deformed, radish-like plant. A young Charles Wells learned all of this firsthand. He had been recruited via a personal connection by a Polish businessman who had opened a sugar beet factory in Ukraine. Known for his engineering expertise, Wells was tasked with improving production methods in order to increase output and reduce costs. He observed daily, from sunrise to sunset, the Ukrainian factory workers slicing these dirty tubers into round rings, the sweat pouring down their brows. A thankless job. So many hours of effort and pain, all to produce just a few ounces of highly refined white powder, which some unsuspecting noble person might someday enjoy with his midday tea. As Wells watched the laborers toil each and every day, he knew that there had to be some other way. Ever since his childhood growing up in the French port city of Marseille, where his family had relocated from his native England, Wells had been fascinated with machines. He would spend his days at the harbor, watching steamboats come in and out, entranced by the complicated pumps and pistons powering these immense vessels. A rather solitary hobby for a child, but he couldn't speak much French after all. As an adolescent, he would go on to work in several of the region's factories, along the way developing a reputation for his sharp mechanical acumen. He eventually returned to the docks, patenting an ingenious device for regulating the speed of marine steam engines, for which he earned 5 years' salary. In imagining such an invention, Charles Wells showed that he knew something profound about human nature. That we want to believe the impossible. That's what technology in this case could offer. The idea that, what if there was more to life than repetition? More than the slow, steady, unremitting grind bringing about middling rewards. In the case of the beet factory, as he had many times before, Wells showed that there could be. The machines he introduced revolutionized sugar production in the area, replacing hard manual labor with smooth and reliable automation. Before long, output had increased by a factor of 10. Clearly, it seemed to everyone involved, there was another way. Though, even if there wasn't, Wells was not going to let that stop him. While nothing excited the taste buds quite like sugar, nothing excited the mind quite like the railway. It captured imaginations, symbolized the future. In this era of expansion, the mid to late 19th century, it promised to connect even the most inaccessible places. By this point, Wells had earned some renown as an inventor and entrepreneur for his work in the south of France. When he announced a pivot to the railway business, investors saw an enticing opportunity. A new rail line, he pitched, which would connect the idyllic northern sea resort of Berck-sur-Mer with Virton, a nearby transit hub. Its construction would make it possible for scores of Parisian vacationers to make the trip. Small individual investors sold on the dream of an untapped gap in the market and huge returns, poured money into the project. But the promises turned out hollow. Despite the venture's claim, no subsidy from the French government had been agreed. Months went by, and when construction failed to materialize, backers started to ask questions. Good ones, in fact. No concrete steps had been made towards even getting things off the ground. Who knows what changed in Wells? For a man with a penchant for hard work, this snake oil salesmanship marked a striking character turn. Maybe he had grown frustrated in his recent sequence of failed inventions, which promised so much but delivered so little. Or maybe he simply realized he could use his reputation as an innovator alone to earn a fortune, without any of the hard work that actual innovation would require. The French authorities, upon catching on to the scheme, came looking for Wells. But by then, he had fled the country, back to his native Britain, and with him, roughly £1 million of investor capital. Plymouth, southwest England, a rough, craggy coast, a place familiar with an almost constant rainfall, hardly the French Riviera. But it was a shipping hub, and it boasted a rich culture of engineering invention. Wells knew the patent process well from his time in France, and saw an opportunity. He started up a small workshop and applied for a number of provisional patents. No matter how outlandish an idea seemed, Wells refused to let practicality outstrip the wildness of his dreams. And why should he? Applying for patents was simple. Just mail in an application slip along with a small wad of cash to the patent office in London and enjoy intellectual property protection for 9 whole months, with the option to extend to 14 years upon receipt of further documentation. The hard part was getting investors to back these novel devices. Luckily, Wells was well versed in selling dreams. Foghorns, balloons, boot polishers, hats, candles, rockets, a self-ventilating train tunnel, a breathable umbrella with a massive hole on the top. Don't worry whether it can keep out the rain or sun, it keeps the air from getting stuffy. He placed all sorts of eye-catching ads in local newspapers, hoping to woo undiscerning speculators. Once the initial deposits came in, Wells would go mostly quiet. Experiments were progressing well, he said, and a sample would be ready soon. Most of these so-called inventions were pure fantasy. The one exception, oddly enough, was a singing jump rope, which went on to become a top-selling child's toy for a number of years. But the commercial success of that one harebrained device couldn't make up for an expensive series of failures. A blind squirrel may find a nut every so often, it turns out, but there's no way he can live off of it for an entire winter. Before long, the shambolic ruse at the center of the inventor's workshop would catch up to Wells. After a few well-researched exposés in local publications, he was facing investor distrust and mounting legal claims. Even his wife Marie, disgusted by his wheelings and dealings, had left him. Wells was at a crossroads, alone and running out of cash. At this very moment of crisis, something truly peculiar happened. He met the woman of his dreams. A French artist's model named Jeannette, a woman with an appetite for luxury that could rival his, until then unparalleled imagination. She enjoyed fine things: jewelry, clothing, luxury, food, and drink. Despite being 20 years his junior, Jeannette and Wells made for a comically perfect couple. And the failed inventor knew he had to come up with a new scheme in order to satisfy her. So, when he saw a listing for an old iron cargo ship being sold at a steep discount in Liverpool, he knew he had to pounce. It was a clunker, to be sure, but with some serious TLC, it could be renovated into a luxury vessel. The Tycho Brahe, it was called. Seems fitting, a boat named after the Danish astronomer who moonlighted as an alchemist. Perfect for a man who had spent his entire life so far trying to transmute iron into gold. And so Wells and Jeannette set sail, away from their life in England, disappearing into uncharted waters. Only until they resurfaced, just a short time later, somewhere that all those transfixed by the shine of gold and glitter might eventually find themselves in those days, sailing into the harbor at Monaco. Wells was not the only one never quite satisfied with his lot in life. Meet Camille Blanc. Born to a wealthy Monegasque family, he grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth. Part of his embarrassment of riches, the Monte Carlo casino, which he inherited from his father Francois. From its founding, the casino, in exchange for exclusive rights to operate in Monaco, would use its proceeds to fund all government expenses. As such, the state could get away without having to tax its citizens. A win-win-win for all involved. But the casino venture had fallen on hard times. Up the road, another family succession had taken place, though this one boasting a somewhat larger inheritance. Prince Charles III had died and passed the royal title to his son Albert, along with rulership of the principality. Unlike his father, Prince Albert, a devout moral purist, found himself distinctly less comfortable turning a blind eye to the mutually beneficial arrangement with the Monte Carlo. Closure was threatened. Blanc needed to hatch a plan to save the casino, along with his family's honor and the financial gain the business provided. And just so it happens, along came Wells. Who knows the extent to which the two men colluded? Even that they met at all remains far from certain. Nonetheless, Blanc and Wells seemed to enjoy an almost symbiotic relationship. Wells would arrive at the casino not like a vacationing millionaire out to have a good time, lazily in the late afternoon, but instead like a businessman, promptly at 11 in the morning. Those on hand likely mistook him for a member of the casino staff. By the fourth day, nobody was mistaking Wells. He had built for himself a reputation and a cool 40,000 pounds. Those rightly skeptical questioned how Wells could have put together such a streak. Perhaps his engineering expertise allowed him to predict the behavior of the casino machines. Or did Blanc, the proprietor, purposefully sit Wells at a table with a biased wheel? Did he discreetly fix the game by keying in Wells to the sequence of cards beforehand? Or maybe it really was the magic touch. Regardless, the unthinkable winning streak made for a spectacle, and it brought in business. With the newfound customer traffic, Blanc's stake in the casino alone ballooned to several million pounds. Fortunes had improved so much that even the moralistic prince came around, extending the arrangement indefinitely and laying the ground for Monaco as it is today, a tax-free luxury haven for the super rich. And Wells? He walked away with a pretty sum himself. A fair reward for his efforts, even if nobody could prove the conspiracy. Wells could have called it there. He made away from the Monte Carlo with more than enough to remodel the Tycho Brahe into a super yacht. But unlike Jeanette, Wells never could feel satisfied with his ill-gotten wealth alone. Rather, he was enamored with the process of amassing it. Call it the rush. A simple man, he kept his personal spending frugal, never drank or smoked, and would habitually eat the same plain meal of boiled eggs. Instead, he satiated himself by selling dreams to the masses. And there was one last dream on offer. Wells would return to Paris and open a bank. Only not under his real name. Instead, he took on a pseudonym, or perhaps more accurately, a persona. Lucien Riviere, a Frenchman who made his fortune by creating a cheaper and more delicious replacement for chocolate, made not out of cocoa, but out of seaweed. Riviere and his staff set up shop in a luxurious third-floor office in the financial district, a reputable redo for an upstanding financial firm. They funneled their efforts into producing leaflets and running newspaper ads touting the promise of the bank's revolutionary new investment product. 1% daily profits, guaranteed, or 365% per annum. Riviere defended his methods to the skeptics. No magic, he opined, but a strictly scientific secret formula. Subscribers grew steadily, and returns started to come in. Perhaps Wells had finally cracked the code, an innovation worthy of his intellect. Daily 1% interest was doled out reliably to patrons. Until one day, Riviere failed to arrive to his esteemed establishment at the usual early hour. The staff a bit surprised. Their boss was always punctual, went about business as usual, paying up arriving clientele from the facility's burgeoning vaults. Only this time, when a cashier went to replenish, he found them empty. Well, empty all but a note from Riviere. He was tendering his resignation. No mention of the missing 1.2 million francs. Pretty soon, the true nature of the business became clear. The bank had been using the principal from new investors to pay out supposed returns to older ones. A perfect Ponzi scheme, long before Ponzi himself got the idea. By the time things started to unravel and French police began an investigation, the kingpin had made his escape. After several weeks of fruitless search, investigators were reaching their wits' end. No records existed of this man Riviere. It wasn't even a genuine French surname. The trail had gone cold. Or had it? Coincidentally, a judge in Lyon read about the case in a police dispatch. The details reminded him of a previous crime just a few years earlier, the culprit of which had also not been caught. Police, desperate for leads, revisited the cold case and somehow found a picture of the accused among the evidence. No photo of Riviere existed with which to compare, but upon interviewing those who knew the escaped financier personally, including a former lover, they established a perfect match. A physical description along with a set of photos and fingerprints. Then it was only a matter of time. The Metropolitan Police in London caught wind, and before long, a man fitting the description was reported in the port town of Falmouth. An arrest soon followed, in coordination of French and British authorities. One Charles Wells. His past had finally caught up to him. The boy from Marseille had flown too close to the sun. A lengthy, multi-year prison sentence would await. A swindler to the very last, Wells spent his twilight years after his release from prison involved in a number of additional dubious schemes, none of which amounting to much. He finally passed in 1922, purportedly due to a heart condition, though even that is unclear. He died owing 2 weeks' rent. A poetically fitting end, perhaps, for a man who spent his life promising people things he could not deliver. Jeanette, now his wife, unable or perhaps unwilling to afford a headstone, put him to rest in an unmarked grave. The streak was up. One way or another, luck had run out. Like the roulette table at the Monte Carlo, that familiar dark fabric came down. An unceremonious but expected end to proceedings. Nothing remained, except tall tales told to those curious enough to ask by those still enchanted enough to tell. These stories a final but futile effort to hold on to the promise of something unimaginable, a glitter of magic in a world of the everyday. A few divine moments, perhaps more so in recollection, able to awaken sullen hearts, to make the especially foolhardy wonder if the man himself was on to something. But no matter, it was too late. The gambler had left the room.
I've just got here through Paris from the sunny southern shore. I to Monte Carlo went just to raise me wind and rent. Dame Fortune smiled upon me as she never smiled before, and I've now got lots of money, I'm a gent. Yes, I've now got lots of rhino, I'm a gent.